You should never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Last week, we reported on the epidemic of cat children plaguing the nation's schools. This was in the Daily Mail. Children identifying as cats are wearing tails and ears in class, warns Britain's toughest head teacher as she cautions that teachers' authority over their pupils is long gone amid rise of the furries. So, in case that's leaving you a little confused, this is in reference to Britain's strictest head teacher and full-time culture wars headbanger Catherine Birbalsingh, alleging that kids are dressing up as cats and demanding that teachers respect and affirm their personas. This story had nearly everything. It's political correctness gone mad with an added dose of self-ID scaremongering and public sector dysfunction. The only thing that was missing? First-hand evidence. The best that Birbalsingh could offer was hearsay and rumour, not enough to really keep a moral panic going into week 2. So the journos are stepping in to help out. In a now deleted tweet, Helen Carroll, whose bylines can often be found at the Daily Mail, put out this request for sources. Looking to speak to a mum whose secondary school-aged child identifies as an animal. Can be anonymous and a fee paid on publication. Please retweet. #journo request. #PR request. As you can see, she got rid of that tweet with the quickness when people started laughing at her. This was also published by Helen Carroll online. My child identifies as an animal. Fee paid on publication. This is a sensitive one, so the interviewee can remain anonymous. I'm looking to interview the mum of a secondary school-aged child who identifies as a cat or another animal. Growing numbers of children appear to be doing so, and I would like to explore some of the complexities of navigating this as a parent and supporting your child the best way you can. Please get in touch without obligation if you would like to discuss it further at email address. That, to me, is the epitome, the high point, the Mount Olympus of responsible journalism. You're paying parents to rat out their kids for what is essentially going to be a hit piece. And this thing about growing numbers of children appear to be adopting personas in schools, it's total nonsense. It's cat litter from top to bottom. There is no hard evidence that waves of children are participating in, living la vida feline. And in fact, I don't think there's been a single confirmed case. It's all been rumor and hearsay. There was one sixth form college, Rye College, which was being accused of affirming the persona of a pupil. They've denied that any one of their students identifies as a cat. And yet, because of Kemi Badenoch, they are being slapped with a snap Ofsted inspection. And look, Helen Carroll's journo request is a pretty transparent attempt to add fuel to the moral panic fire and to justify the outrage by putting up some kids and some teachers as hate figures. But luckily, people have been treating this #journo request with the seriousness that it deserves. Freelance journalist Sarah Woolley may have inadvertently popularized the idea of sending Helen some spoof submissions. It would be terrible if you all sent your most creative submissions to the email in the second photo, arranged a phone call, and meowed down the phone. This was shared on Twitter. Terrible indeed. Some of the responses have been pretty great. Someone sent Helen an email saying, "Dear Helen, thank you so much for working on this important topic on kids identifying as animals. In my son's school, a majority of kids now identify as various animals. But the worst is one that my son came home last week and told me he now identifies as an axolotl after he apparently saw a couple of memes about them on TikTok. He made me bring a splashing pool to class and insists the teacher feeds him tadpoles. It's very embarrassing and frankly tearing our family apart. I'm happy to go on the record with my story." And here's my particular favourite for all of you Franz Kafka heads out there. Good morning, Helen. Thank you for agreeing to talk about this incredibly important issue. I thought I was alone in this, but it is reassuring to know that there are others going through the same thing as me out there. Sadly, my son woke up one day after an uneasy sleep and started identifying as a gigantic insect. He is a 23-year-old man and held down a decent job as a cloth merchant, but this obsession is now ruining his life. He can't hold down relationships. He refuses to communicate. He drags himself around the floor. I fear sometimes I'm starting to believe him. I would be happy to discuss my experiences. Look, as stupid and funny as this all is, this whole cat children thing tells you something about how the media operates. Instead of starting with facts, putting them in context, and then writing a story, it's all the other way around. They've started with the story that they want, that trans and non binary stuff has gone too far. Anyone can identify as anything nowadays. It's making our kids weird, and teachers are going along with it. And they're trying to cherry pick facts that suit a narrative that's already been established. This was Michelle Dewberry on GB News last week.
Meow. I learned something new today, everybody. It's perfectly acceptable to identify as a cat. You what? Don't you dare mock it, by the way, because I've decided that is now what I am, Meow Shell, to you. But if you do indeed mock it, careful, because I wouldn't be surprised if it could be considered a hate crime. Self-identity, where do we draw the line? Kids at school being told that they must respect it if this is how their peers seriously want to present themselves. Really? What on earth is going on in our schools? How worried about it should we be? And why are parents not allowed to see the content that children are being taught? Very alarming, if you ask me.
All of this hooting and hollering when there's no evidence that it's even happening. Okay, Aaron, let's say that Helen Carroll or Michelle Dewberry, let's say they do find a case of a furry taking further maths. Does that mean I have to eat a big bowl of humble kibble?
Well, perhaps, Ash. Maybe you won't be so lucky for it to be kibble. Maybe it'll be, you might have to have a more unsavory feline snack. Answering this more seriously, I mean, this is the thing. When people say this to me on Twitter, oh, there are people identifying as cats, children identifying as cats. Have you met one? Have you met? No, I know somebody who did meet one, though. Or my mum said this, my dad said this, they're teachers, they're seeing it all the time. Okay. Have you met one? And so somebody who has met somebody who identifies as a furry, okay, let's say this young person is hit by a car. It's not too bad, but they've just been shaken up. They've fallen off their bike. Are they seriously going to say, I need to go to a vet? No, I want to go to a hospital. When they have a health issue, they see their GP. They don't actually think they're cats and dogs, okay? It's a playing thing, I guess. You know, kids, when I was a primary school, kids would have imaginary friends. This wasn't being sort of viewed as part of a mental health disorder. It's just kids have imaginary friends. I remember being in my grammar school and there was a young guy. I hope if you're watching, Thomas, I hope you're well. He used to think he was Cyndi Lauper, okay? He used to give performances to people at lunchtime, singing into his hairbrush. You know, again, this wasn't pathologized as something. I mean, maybe it should have been. I don't know. He seemed okay apart from that.
What do you mean apart from that? Thomas sounds like a legend. And Thomas, if you're out there, I want to hear your Cyndi Lauper. I want to hear it.
Yeah, I don't think he actually believed he was Cyndi Lauper. He would say, I'm Cyndi Lauper. I don't think he believed he was Cyndi Lauper, right? It's like these kids saying I'm a cat. If they get really sick, they want to go see a doctor. They don't want to go to the vet, right? They've got the NHS. They don't need, a pet plan. I'm sure they don't seriously believe that. They want to buy clothes. They don't go out saying, oh God, where's my collar and my bell? They don't start trying to attack birds when they see them. So it's an interesting kind of intraspecies performance, perhaps. Look, I'm not that au fait with it, but it's also just not that big a deal. And I think the real political aspect of this is, Ash, as you've hinted at or overtly said, is this kind of elision between, some people suffer gender dysphoria or experience gender dysphoria, and they don't really identify with the gender they've been assigned at birth. And this is somehow the same as somebody who thinks they're a tortoise. Or in the words of Catherine Birbal Singh, she knows of a young boy who identifies as a gay male hologram. What the fuck are you talking about? So there's a few issues going on here. We might talk about the nature of changing identities in the 21st century. Perhaps there's something that's interesting about that. But the idea that somehow the same as people experiencing gender dysphoria or, perhaps just being curious about their sexuality and gender, very, very strange. And I think, look, the right always do this. The conservatives, the social conservatives always do this, particularly in America, which is they'll start sometimes with a point which you might not think is reasonable, but at least you can debate it. They would say, look, we don't think there should be sex education for children below a certain age. Okay? You can agree or disagree. They start there, and then they end up in these absolutely zany, insane, conspiratorial places where they'll say that, whole schools of children identify as giraffes, right? And I think kind of you're discrediting your own initial point and your own initial perspective. Okay, you can probably have a social conversation around: should we ban iPhones in schools? Should we ban smartphones? Should they be able to access social media? Should we teach them certain things in schools and not teach certain things in schools? Again, you might disagree with certain positions on that, but that's part of a broader social debate. But they inevitably end up in the most outlandish fairy tale parts of the human psyche. And I think that says something about their political vision. Because I think if you're a reactionary in the 21st century, you probably recognize that you can't go back, right? So you end up in this very sort of deranged, constant clawing. How ironic I've used that verb. Constant clawing at modernity itself. And I think precisely because they can't comprehend it, they have to just generate these strange and actually quite amusing fantasies.
I will say this, I've recently moved to a new place and it backs onto a primary school. And I did hear, as you do, you hear children playing at lunchtime and break time. I did hear pupil yelling meow, meow today. And I laughed to myself. I was like, either you've been watching GB News or this is just a phenomenal coincidence.